Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is your host, Kyle Buller. Today on the show, I get to chat with Dr. Carlene MacMillan, CEO and co-founder over at Brooklyn Minds. In today's episode, we get to chat about ketamine, some of the work that they're doing over at Brooklyn Minds, Spravato. You may know that as S-ketamine, the importance of insurance, setting, and systems, and also exploring some alternative treatment options outside of insurance. Really, really interesting conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. I'll let Dr. MacMillan give her own little intro as we get rolling here. So some reminders, we are kicking off our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course starting September 23rd. This is probably going to be our last cohort for the year. So if you're thinking about signing up, be sure to sign up for this one in September. We're taking a little break just because of the holiday season, and we probably won't have another course until the new year. So if you have been thinking about taking it, you want to get in before the holiday, definitely sign up. We still have some spaces available. You can check that out at psychedelicecenter.com. And again, for those that may just be tuning in, Navigating Psychedelics is an 8-week online hybrid course. You get access to tons and tons of online material, pre-recorded material, master classes, and interviews with experts in the space. And then you join us on Zoom for an hour and a half for 8 weeks to dive into that material, to have group discussions, have that classroom time. And also one of my favorite parts about the class is the group project, or it's not a group project, but it's an individual project. It's your integration project. And I just always really love seeing what our students are putting together and moving their experience forward. So that's always a real joy to create that container for people to explore their own process a little bit. If you are in Australia or you're in a time zone that really caters to that time, you can check out our upcoming offering as well for that Australia group. Not limited to people in Australia, but really kind of hitting that time zone area. That is going to kick off on October 20th. And we have 3 really, really awesome instructors teaching that, Dr. Alana Roy, Melissa Warner, and also Diego Pinzon. So sorry, Diego, if I mispronounced your name there. So check that out. Again, psychedelicecenter.com. Go over to Navigating Psychedelics, and then you can check out there's an option for the Australia group. So I hear it's been going awesome. Since it's catering that time, I don't get to join in on the classes, but definitely check that out if you're in that time zone. And also be sure to stay up to date. We have some new upcoming courses in the works. We have a ketamine and trauma series coming up, and then also another course, Psychedelics Past, Present, and Future. So really excited to get those out as well. So I think that's it for updates on courses and events. If you love what we're doing over here at Psychedelics Today, please be sure to subscribe to us on wherever you listen to podcasts, Google, Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever that is. Greatly appreciate it. If you're feeling called to leave us a review on iTunes, that helps us out a whole bunch. So thank you. And if you want to support us on Patreon by leaving a small monthly donation to help keep the lights on over here at Psychedelics Today, you can do so at patreon.com/psychedelics today. Again, thank you for listening, everybody. And thank you for all the support. Always appreciative. Can't do this without you. So thank you again. All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Carlene MacMillan, and we will catch you on the other side. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today, I'm joined with Carlene MacMillan, CEO and co-founder of Brooklyn Minds. Welcome to the show, Carlene. Really excited to have you here.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
I should say Dr. Carlene.
It's fine. You can call me Carlene. This is good. Dr. Carlene. Dr. MacMillan, I'd prefer not. So it's too formal.
Cool. You want to give the listeners a little bit of background information on who you are and maybe a little bit about the practice over at Brooklyn Mind?
Sure. So I'm an adult and child psychiatrist by training, trained up at Harvard at Mass General McLean, and eventually moved to New York and founded Brooklyn Minds about 5 years ago now to be really a team-based practice that helped people for whom more traditional psychiatric help wasn't helpful. People who, just regular therapy and meds just weren't cutting it. And so we really work as a multidisciplinary team to help people with severe, difficult to treat depression, people with suicidal thinking or suicide attempts, people who've been in and out of hospitals, kind of revolving door, and, offer them everything from innovative therapies like mentalization-based therapy to Spravato to transcranial magnetic stimulation, and are really preparing for the psychedelic, the psychedelic renaissance is here, I think, but preparing as things, as they become FDA approved to be able to really implement them quickly. I think we were the first site in New York to implement Spravato when it was FDA approved. And, we want to be in that position as things come down the pipeline. So that's what we're building and looking to scale, beyond the New York area as well. So yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Wonderful. Do you work with regular ketamine or mostly Spravato?
So right now we do Spravato. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because we started with transcranial magnetic stimulation for severe depression. And that's something where people typically are using their insurance benefits for that. It's quite expensive without insurance. It's, probably between $10,000 and $20,000 without it. So we already kind of had the infrastructure in place to take different insurance, plans. And then with Spravato, it's the same kind of thing. Like Spravato is problematic in that the cost of the drug is really high for insurance companies, but for the patients, they're only having to pay for the copays, and then the visits can be covered if we take their insurance. And so, for people that were looking for an insurance-based way to access psychedelics, and that became, a good choice for us. And, we're interested in starting something with IV ketamine, but there's a number of good colleagues in the city that were already doing that. And so we didn't feel like there was as much of a need. And a lot of our colleagues were reluctant to do Spravato because they didn't want the hassle of the insurance stuff. They didn't want to do that sort of the hoops and the paperwork, the appeals, and all of that kind of stuff. So we figured that was a better use of our time than just like duplicating something that, our colleagues down the street were doing well. So,
right.
Yeah.
And so if somebody is looking for a service like that, would you end up kind of like referring out and working collaboratively like that?
Yes. And I think I think, in New York, like in many different parts of the country, there's a number of ketamine practices that are not run by psychiatrists. They're run by anesthesiologists, pain medicine specialists, or emergency room physicians. And some of those places, pretty much anyone could walk in there and have some kind of evaluation, by an anesthesiologist and start ketamine. That's not what we like to do. So we like to work with the practices that insist upon having a collaborating psychiatrist and will work really with us, so that they know that they're not kind of going off of their lane and we're not going off of ours. And so we work a lot actually with a practice called Ember Health in New York City, because they very strictly will only work with practices like us. Yeah. So Nico is great. And, we typically, people that are coming to us are seeking us out because of the Spravato. Reasons that we might want to refer for ketamine would be because the Spravato dosing is limited. And if people need a higher dose, we can go in that direction with ketamine, and they can, put other things in the IV if they need to for nausea and anxiety. And so, we're very comfortable working with the folks at Ember around that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard wonderful things about their work over there.
Yeah, we're kindred spirits.
Yeah. And I guess there's been kind of like a lot of controversy around Spravato as it started to come on the scene, I guess within kind of like the ketamine world. And some people just kind of talked about the pricing of it and just how ridiculous it is. Like, do you see what are the benefits and limitations about using Spravato in this kind of clinical setting?
Yeah, I mean the cost of it, is kind of that pharmaceutical industry price gouging situation where it's $800, $900 per dose, which is, I think, really in comparison to IV ketamine is just astronomically different. But the reality is that that's what the insurance will cover. So insurance is not covering ketamine for psychiatric indications. There are maybe some places that find ways around that aren't really on the up and up. And so, for us, it's just, I'm a pragmatist and I want the patients to get the treatment. And for some, several $1,000s for a ketamine course is not feasible. So that's where Spravato has a big advantage. And we oftentimes will get people who have had good success with IV ketamine, but like can't afford another course, or they can't afford maintenance, or, so they're coming, as an alternative. And, when it first came out, managed Medicaid in New York wasn't covering it, but as of January, plans like Health First are covering it. And so to be able to offer this type of treatment to someone with a Medicaid plan, that's quite a different population. It's quite that's to me, that's quite rewarding to be able to do that compared to just ketamine is just not that way. So at least not right now. That's a big advantage of it. And then, occasionally we get people who have fears of needles, who don't want that and are more comfortable with it this way. It's just sort of in the office. You don't need as much, supplies and all of that.
Yeah. And are you finding it just as effective as, like, say, some of the other clinics that are using IM or IV or kind of like lozenges with psychotherapy?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the lozenges, there's the kind of variable bioavailability and different quality in terms of compounding and things like that. So I think that it's, we haven't done like a head-to-head trial, but I think people that have gotten both, like if they've responded to IV ketamine, they're going to be responding to Spravato. I wouldn't expect, if you didn't respond to IV ketamine, I wouldn't expect you to respond to Spravato. But I think we're seeing like people either it does like kind of nothing, like it's a bust, or it's like dramatic. There doesn't seem to be a lot of like, well, maybe it worked, I'm not sure. It's really no, like, wow, like I feel completely different. Like that suicidal voice in my head is just gone now. Like it's just remarkable when it works. And these are people who, some of them have tried transcranial magnetic stimulation, did not respond to that. Some of them have tried like 12 different medications. I mean, this is really people that did not feel like they could get better getting relief, which is quite striking to see.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, and I guess, I'm just really curious about this. We haven't really talked too much about Spravato on the show, I guess, besides some of those controversies. And, it does sound like it's making it a little bit more accessible, people on Medicaid being able to access that. And yeah, just thinking about ketamine treatment in general, a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. It's not very accessible. And people that might be really struggling to be able to have a tool in the toolbox like that. And just thinking about, I guess if there is some of that like kind of like stigma around it at times, like can we shift that? Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, like I don't want to do that. The price of it's just ridiculous, and I don't want to get caught up in the insurance, and maybe doing it this way is a little bit easier. So yeah, just try and maybe like help shift this narrative a little bit.
Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily seem as drastic to people as well. Like it's like a nasal spray, like Afrin or something. Like, and I think the other thing is it is very medical. I think it looks like a drug. It looks very official, and for some people that's very off-putting and very cold and sterile. But for other people who are coming at this from that more like mental health psychiatric place first, they're like kind of off put by some of the marketing for some of the psychedelic stuff. Like I always think like my dad, like, if my dad who has a history of depression, like which is he going to think is like appropriate for him? And right now, like he's going to look at something like Spravato and it's got that FDA seal of approval and that sort of officialness to it. That's going to be a way for him to kind of enter into this space in a way that he feels comfortable. Which is, I think as a place that's a psychiatric practice first, that's kind of more who we're seeing versus say like, I think like Field Trip, there's definitely overlap, but like my dad is going to look at a company like that and he's going to find that to be like, wow, is that, and all of the sort of stigma that comes with the psychedelics is going to be more apparent with that and with IV ketamine than something that's, the sort of traditional FDA path. So.
Right. Yeah. Good point there. So when we originally kind of connected, you kind of pitched this idea to talk about setting and systems. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that.
hmm Yeah. So I think, everyone kind of knows the set and setting is important for a psychedelic experience. But I think, what we really feel gets oftentimes the short end of the stick there is the system part, because I think that this psychedelic medicine holds just amazing promise for the mental health field and chronic pain. And, really can be transformative. But my concern is that once these things are, approved, FDA approved, that we're not going to have the infrastructure in place to actually deliver it to people in any kind of like affordable way at scale. And so I think when we talk about system, I'm really interested in how can we get insurance companies and then self-insured plans, which means like employers that basically arrange their own insurance coverage for their employees. How can we get these plans on board to be able to cover these drugs in ways that are going to be affordable and sustainable? Because ketamine it's a 2-hour thing. That's not so bad. Like we kind of have codes for that. We can get some reimbursement. The overall feeling though in the field is that a lot of clinicians just don't even want it in their practice because the existing insurance codes are not reimbursing enough to make it like worth their while, and the staff time and the room time and all of those things. And when we think of things like psilocybin and MDMA, you're talking 8 hours, 12 hours, long periods of time. And the way our current health insurance stuff is set up is called fee for service, meaning, you basically bill based on like the time spent, what did you do, like very procedure based. It's not actually based on the outcome. Like it's not based on whether or not this helped a person. Like, did this help the person get back to work? Did this allow the person to not go to the emergency room of the hospital? Right? It's not based on that. It's like what you get on a test doesn't matter how many questions you got right. Like the grade is just, did you complete all the questions? Right? So that's our system is built like that, and unfortunately, that means that they don't really value appropriately something that's going to take 8 hours. They're not going to price that in a way that's going to be like some of these codes, they're reimbursing like $7 an hour for a staff support person. Like that's ridiculous. Like that's not reasonable. So what we did in our practice was, we were forging relationships with insurance companies that are open to this. And, one company is Cigna, and we've had a really good relationship with Cigna, and they're helping to really kind of develop how we code these things so that we're able to get more sustainable coverage and move towards what's known in healthcare as value-based care. Value-based care is kind of a buzzword if you're in this sort of health insurance or primary care space. And basically it means that insurers would start to pay more based on how patients are doing and how changed they are from when they came in, rather than just, how many hours did you spend and what procedures did you do. And it's something that has come into primary care quite a bit, as, for like Medicare practices and things like that. And there's interest in it in mental health. And I think, our practice is one of the, practices on the forefront of that. But we really need all of our colleagues. We really need to make some headway in this value-based care realm if we want this stuff covered. Because, these things, they can save the insurance companies money. They can save the system quite a bit of money because they're so effective. And we need to work with insurers to demonstrate that and get that to happen. I know in Canada, there's some of the disability carriers are actually basically like paying for people's, ketamine courses because then they don't have to pay for like the disability for that employee. Wow. The employee then goes to work, right? So that's the kind of thinking that we need, because then insurance companies are going to be incentivized to pay for the course of psilocybin, even though it's like quite expensive at the outset in terms of the amount of hours, because the upside is that person isn't going to go to the hospital, or they're not going to need to be on super expensive brand name antidepressants that barely work. And so, and for employers that are self-insured, which is about 60% of companies in the United States, actually, they're like very cost conscious, and they're basically just paying for the services their employees use. So, and they want their employees to be working. So they have a very vested interest in finding interventions that work. And so companies that we're working with, are very interested in psychedelics, and very interested because we can show these big effect sizes. We can show, this intervention's actually going to move the needle for this person or their family member. And that's a huge thing. And that's, I don't hear that talked about too much in the field, right? I hear more about like the interesting science and trials, and I hear stuff about accessibility in terms of like, scholarships and nonprofits and grants and things like that. And I think that's all very important. But I think if we really want this to be just mainstream and just widely part of the mental health toolkit, we need to also really focus in on this insurance piece. So that's my soapbox. That's kind of where we're coming from by way of practicality.
Yeah, no, and I love it. And I think this is, I think a question a lot of people have been like asking, right? Like, will MDMA eventually be covered? Will psilocybin therapy be covered by insurance? And, we think about how resource intensive psilocybin or MDMA therapy, as you stated, I mean, like 6-8 hours, maybe longer if somebody needs that extra support. What type of systems do we have in place to really care for that person? And are insurance companies going to reimburse that? Who knows, right? But I think I always wonder, like, where, like, the thinking or perspective around, why are we so focused on that time if it's going to have a huge upfront cost versus, I guess, like you're saying, this kind of value-based approach where it's like, well, the long-term effects could actually save you money. And yeah, what's the hang up there within insurance companies and the health system in general?
What's the hang up? Yeah, honestly, it's bureaucracy is the major hang up.
Yeah.
We'll talk to very forward-thinking people in the insurance companies, and then once you get down to the people that are like entering codes into their computer systems, they're like, well, our computer system can't do that. Like we can't put more of one of those a day. That won't work. Like they run up against all these like roadblocks that don't make any sort of clinical sense, but there's like so many hoops to jump through at the big insurance companies. So like the Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, we call them BUCA, that they move slowly and they want to be innovative and they have innovative people within them. And that's the thing is, I think, when we first started out, like our relationship with Cigna started out because my husband, who's a psychiatrist as well, and my partner in the business, he did like an angry tweet at Cigna about some sort of insurance denial. And it got the attention of people there. And, we had that sort of view of insurance companies as like the big bad wolf and they're out to get us. And we've actually really learned since that time that there are really good people within these companies trying to do really innovative things. It's just that there's a lot there's a lot of other forces within there bureaucratically that make that challenging, and there's a lot of fragmentation where like, oh, well, that's a medical spend and this is a pharmacy spend and this is a mental health spend, and these departments don't necessarily talk to each other, and people are kind of have a tunnel vision. And so it's really about kind of building coalitions within these companies that can actually affect change. Because this is happening in primary care, there's starting to be more of a roadmap for this for mental health, which is it is in a lot of ways very similar to primary care. I mean, for many of our patients, they don't have a primary care doctor. We're it as their psychiatrist. So it's just people have to care. They have to not just opt out. And a lot of our colleagues just opt out. They just don't take insurance. And I don't blame them. It's a huge pain. But specifically like in New York City, major metropolitan areas, you have a lot of people in solo practice not taking insurance, or even building group practices, particularly around psychedelics, where they're just not taking insurance because it feels overwhelming to try to tackle this type of problem. But like someone has to do it. And that's how we started to get more involved with the employers that do the self-insured plans, because they can move faster. They're much more agile. So like at my company, we have about 80 employees and we went to a self-insured plan. So if one of my employees needs mental health care, they need specialized care, let's say they need an eating disorder program or substance use program, our plan, basically, like, we get to decide. We're not like beholden to, United or something. Like, we can work with a given place and say, okay, you have a really good program for substance use. Let's work out an arrangement. We're going to pay you fairly. Great. My employee is going to go there now. And that's where you're going to get the most headway with the psychedelics, because then, like, if my employee, if psilocybin, once it gets FDA approved, if I have, employee that needs that, like, my self-insured plan is going to decide to cover that, because I know that's really effective. And companies around the country can start to do that. And once those companies do that, then you get data, you get evidence that this is a good thing. And then the big Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, then they start to notice, and then they'll start to be able to make those changes. And that's kind of what happened in primary care as well. So, yeah, you just have to start having those conversations and say, well, why not? Well, why can't this be covered? Why is this valuable?
Super interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, do we need some sort of, like, I guess, different insurance, like a psychedelic insurance company that will help to really kind of back a lot of this stuff and provide that level of care for folks?
So maybe, yes. So I think that's there is a company sort of like that out there, I think, getting started. There are some weird regulations around that in certain states where they won't allow that sort of a special plan. So I think there's more like what we're doing. Our program is called Sphere Health, and ours is more of like basically like a mental health add-on to plan. So if you're a company, you sell widgets, and your widget workers need like fertility benefits, you might get like an add-on that's about fertility. They have add-ons for like stroke coverage. Like, so you would just get an add-on for mental health that included the psychedelic stuff. And so that's very doable in the self-insured marketplace. For the big insurers, just, out of the box, like getting Blue Cross or whatever, they need to have that as part of their plan. You can't really add on to that. But there are ways to do this. And that's what we've been, I think, exploring, and hope more people would explore as well. And, I think people that own businesses as well, if like they're self-insured and they're listening, like this is something to consider as these things are coming online.
Yeah, I guess, like, for small businesses and stuff like that, like how do you go about these self-insured plans to be able to have these add-ons, and I guess kind of like maybe get a little more specialized in what people could get care in?
Mm-hmm. How do you go about it adding them? Well, there's a whole kind of been introduced into the world of the insurance brokers that do this for employers. And so like they work with HR departments, and there's like, I'm on like a listserv for like, it's called like healthcare hackers. And they're all these like insurance people who will just like, all day long just have like the finger on the pulse of like, well, here's this new startup that's doing this interesting thing for diabetes care. Or they're, doing an interesting thing for cancer care. And now there's like an interesting thing for mental health. And I think until, we came along, there actually really, there wasn't much that was interesting for mental health, in that there weren't companies really doing severe mental health. So there are companies that you see in the news, like Ginger, for example, or Lyra, which are really great and, really, excellent companies, but they're primarily doing like telehealth, coaching, apps to support wellness and things like that. They don't have offices to give ketamine or esketamine. They don't have offices for giant brain magnets. Like, that's just not who they're helping. And so there does need to be people like in that marketplace interested in, severe treatment resistant psychiatric illness. And that's sort of the niche that we've started to fill. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Thinking about like MDMA getting covered, like I'm sure MAPS is probably working on that. And, with psilocybin, I'm sure, people are trying to work on that. But I wonder with like off-label use of ketamine, like, do you think that could ever get approved? And what would clinicians and psychiatrists, therapists, across the nation like need to do to really fight for that, so that could be available? Or do you think like there is some sort of block with Janssen and the pharmaceutical companies that they kind of want to hold that patent?
Yeah. So I don't think I actually told you. So I'm on the ketamine task force, which started, I think, about a year or
Mm,
so ago by Kimberly Jurafesky, who runs a number of the Facebook groups for ketamine. She runs one for clinicians, and then she runs one for patients. And so it's a small group of people. I'm on it. Lucia from Osmind is on it, for example. It's sort of an eclectic group of people with like patients and nurses and psychiatrists, anesthesiologists, technologists, and we're all working on this. And I just submitted something to Medicare regarding this issue. So right now the committee is focused on getting ketamine approved on label for chronic pain, and then the next step after that would be to get it approved for depression and
mm,
suicidal thinking. So I think it's an uphill battle. There's a lot of issues around insurance coding and things that make it kind of a tough sell. But there is a sort of solid evidence base, and we can present that. But we have to do it. It has to be more of a grassroots effort, because the pharmaceutical industry is not, they're not interested in that, right? Janssen isn't interested in that. I don't think they can block it or anything like that, but it just, there's a lot of kind of hoops to jump through, and a lot of like proving that this needs to exist and that this is actually a problem. And I think now that as ketamine came along, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because now we have like further evidence that this class of medication works, but then they
mm.
can say, oh, but we have this medication that works. The thing is, from a cost-effective standpoint, IV ketamine is actually the better choice, right? It actually would be a lot cheaper if we were to able to get it covered. So that's,
Yeah.
theoretically, those should be, that should be the argument. But whether or not we're successful, I don't know. And when it comes to MDMA and psilocybin, I think MAPS is predominantly right now, understandably, focused more on getting the FDA approval and getting, the DEA reclassification stuff happening. I don't actually think that they're really at the stage of like lobbying insurance, because you can't really they can't really go to insurance until you have that FDA step. And I think once something
Right.
is FDA approved, I think that there is definitely still a delay before, insurance aren't just like, oh great, it's FDA approved, like let's cover it now. It took the some of the like the Medicaid insurance, like it took them over a year to start to even have like a way to submit an application to get Spravato covered. And when we first started submitting for Spravato, insurance companies were like, what is this? I don't know. We don't have criteria yet. And, it took them a while to kind of get the criteria as to who they were going to allow to get it covered. And then like we would pay for $800, and then the insurance would reimburse us $200 for the drug. Like that doesn't work. That's practices can't operate at that kind of loss. So there's like a lot of work that you have to do once these things are FDA approved to get them into the hands of patients and get them paid for. It's doable, but
Yeah. And I guess even think about like the model, like just thinking about like that long form psychotherapy aspect too. It's like, yeah, how do insurance companies like view that of like, oh, you're going to, have two therapists spend time with somebody for like 8 hours, how do we bill for that? How do we like reimburse that? I'm sure it's probably like a totally just new model that they're going to have to adapt to as well.
yes. I mean, the interesting thing is like with those things where you have two facilitators in the room, that's also doesn't really work for fee for service coding. Like that's right now, that's why you really would need to move to a value-based model where they're looking at it from a more holistic view of like, what is this actual whole treatment costing? Like, how much is it costing for the facility? How much is it costing to have those two people on staff? Do we care what their credentials are? Because insurance companies, they don't want just anybody doing this, right? They tend to be very specific about who can and cannot. And at the same token, they're probably not going to want two fully licensed people. My guess is they're going to say one fully licensed and one not is going to be like what they would say is cost effective. Like they're going to have to make some decisions around that. But yeah, right now, like if it was approved tomorrow, we would not be ready for it. The coding, nothing. No, it would be like, great, it's approved. Who's going to pay for it now?
Yeah. This is a little off topic, but kind of on topic as well. Just thinking about maybe like different approaches and maybe different models. So like I used to work at a place in Vermont that was a residential facility for people experiencing early episode psychosis. And obviously, kind of like these experimental type of places don't really get funding from insurance companies. So that's why a lot of them don't end up existing. And so it was based off of some research back in the 60s and 70s, based off of Dr. Lauren Mosher's Soteria House. And somebody dug up the research, and there was a hurricane that swept through Vermont and ended up wiping out the psychiatric unit there. And so they wanted to build in, they wanted to build in smaller community mental health centers. And somebody dug up this old research and pitched it to the state, but they pitched it that getting people with early breaks of psychosis into a place where it's staffed by peer support. Mm-hmm. And, there was we had psychiatrists and a nurse on staff as well. They were contracted, but they weren't at the house the whole time. It was mostly staffed by peer support. And the state ended up funding it. So the residents could come there for 3 to 6 months, fully paid for by the state. I'm not too sure what it is. That's like great. Now. I was there in the beginning, but just even thinking about like an alternative model like that. But it seemed like that was a selling point from what I remember, is that, we could catch these people at an early break, kind of like preventative care. And, there's a little bit of research that backs this, and you're going to save a bunch of money versus getting them at the hospital and spending all this money at the hospital. It's like, how can we save the state money here? And it seemed like that worked. And I'm not really too sure how it's funded now. I've heard, there's definitely been some changes, but I just thought that was like super interesting to be part of and see how, maybe there could be other ways outside of insurance companies. It's just one little kind of experiment.
Yeah, no, I think, therapeutic communities with peer support is definitely of interest. Like in New York City, we have like the Fountain House is like a great kind of outpatient community in that way. In our practice, we have peer support. We have like a coaching program, outpatient coaching program to help people stay in the community. And so like if somebody is manic and hospitalizations have been really traumatic and sort of counterproductive for that individual, then, we might have coaches come and stay with them, even up to 24/7 or shifts, or, and helping them kind of structure their time, make sure that they're, staying on track with their treatment plan. The thing is that right now with fee-for-service stuff, that kind of stuff is not covered. So people have to pay for that out of pocket. Yeah. With value-based care, though, that stuff is covered. And so if you look in New York City Block, which is a primary care company that's working with people, in kind of underserved areas of New York, they have value-based care. So they basically will go into the community and like, if somebody, needs a new refrigerator, like for their insulin, they will get it. If somebody needs a lamp because their house is too dark, like they'll help them get it. Like they'll go in and really help and use people kind of across, from full physicians to peer specialists. They'll do kind of whatever it takes to get that person well. And their, City Block is very heavily venture funded and, is a really good example of that. And they've been able to negotiate some good contracts with certain Medicaid plans to get that to happen. I think we need that to happen in mental health as well. People that need that specifically for pretty chronic and severe mental illness. And it would include things like psychedelics and people to sit with people and help with integration and, all of those pieces, I think, that are so important.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to move to thinking about like scalability. So this is something that you also brought up before we got recording here. Like, how do we scale like the psychedelic practice? And yeah, I mean, I think this is a question that a lot of people are having, especially when it's it's covered and it's going to be probably not accessible to a lot of people. So yeah, just this idea of scaling a practice that is very resource intensive. Again, like thinking about like the 2 therapists, the long hours, and just thinking about like how do we scale a psychedelic practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why there's a lot of venture interest in this space because it is going to take sort of significant external funding to build this infrastructure. Like it's one thing, like we can build in New York, but if we want to build across the country, then, you do need to take on outside funding that's aligned. And I think right now, there's definitely more interest in like the brick and mortar clinics. It was very interesting. Like pre-pandemic, there was interest. And then when the pandemic hit, there was such a massive spotlight on telehealth that a lot of investors in the mental health space said, ugh, brick and mortar, what is that? We don't want, what do you need a clinic for? No. We're going to do an app and we're going to do this Zoom and that's going to be great. And tons and tons of money went, millions of dollars, not billions, went into that type of digital mental health. And that's great. And that's very needed. But it left a gap for people that maybe someday we'll have the FDA and the DEA super on board with in-house, people going to the home and getting ketamine and stuff. That's a gray area. That still is resource heavy, right? I mean, you still need infrastructure. You still need like people and supplies and all of that. And so I think now that the pandemic is shifting and people are like, oh, wait a second, we can't just like throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do need to have some kind of clinical footprints here. The setting matters, right? So setting and system, all of those things matter. And that's going to take funding of investors that believe in this and don't want it to become McDonald's also, right? Because that's not the experience that we want either. People with their mental health care, they want to feel taken care of. They want to feel something that's local to their community and traditions. You don't want it to be like going to a McDonald's or a Dunkin' Donuts. And I think that is a fear I have as we see some of the money pouring into the space, or you see people coming in who have no connection to mental health. They just think this is something that they can make a lot of money on, versus people that are coming in because they believe in in psychedelics and they want to help. We're going to have to be careful with that. So I think public benefit companies are interesting.
Totally. I guess if you were to envision like the psychedelic ecosystem in the future, what would that look like to you? Like an ideal psychedelic ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a psychiatrist, sometimes the criticism that I get and my colleagues get is that this should not be medicalized, and that we're going to like take it away from people in indigenous communities or people that are using it predominantly for spiritual uses or other types of experiences. And that is not my intention at all. I think the ecosystem is going to be really, really broad, and people using things for different reasons in different contexts. My focus is on the severe psychiatric patients who like have zero interest in some sort of, kind of experience on their own. Like that's terrifying to them. They want the clinic setting. They want their treatment team. Yeah. That's who I'm focused on. But I don't want to force someone into that is using this for a spiritual experience. They can have their own, own communities and own groups. And I think that there's such a wide range of uses for these agents that can cause changes in the brain. Like it doesn't have to look like one size fits all. So I see that happening. And I think people that I talk with are more collaborative around that, but occasionally we'll get people getting very, very, very suspicious or, thinking that we're going to, commodify it and all of that. But I think the reality is that for some of my patients who have severe suicidal thinking and whatnot, like they're going to need help. Like that's not something that you want them to just do kind of on their own. And I think that's sometimes hard for people to imagine who are really at the other end of the continuum. So, yeah, I hope that sort of starts to answer that.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you for that. And as you're speaking, I just wonder maybe like how much like maybe miscommunication is like kind of happening at times. Like, because being a therapist, like I definitely get people reaching out saying like they wouldn't feel comfortable going to an underground guide that maybe doesn't have that much like clinical experience. They want to do it in a safe setting. They want to do it with like a professional versus like in a spiritual container.
Right.
And I guess, like how do we with all these different fields and contexts, like how do we honor each approach and I guess start developing these relationships and start to understand where, yeah, this person may really need a strong clinical container. That's what they're really struggling with. This kind of like this spiritual or peer support container isn't going to be beneficial for them versus, other people that maybe have their stuff together a little bit more. They want to do some self-exploration. They want to do self-discovery. That definitely has been, I guess, something I've been sitting with at times doing this project over the past 5 years, just talking to so many different people. I've always thought it needs to be very intentional. It needs to be done in this certain container. And also hearing some of the benefits of people finding benefit in other containers and having, I guess, to do some of my own self-reflection and be like, well, yeah, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing, wow, people are going out and using them in places I would never think about using it, but they're dancing, they're having fun, they're connecting.
Yep.
And how healing is that to some people,
Exactly. I think that if we just take psychedelics out of the equation and just look at the mental health field, for many years, there'll be spiritual leaders, rabbis, shaman, priests, all different kinds of things who are working with people in their religious spiritual communities whom they believe need mental health help at some point. And we work with those communities to be wow, this, one of my supervisors always used to say, the monk sending the other monk who was praying too much, right? When people they can sense within that community, this person, needs more support than we're going to be able, the type of support that we're able to give, and to work together. And similarly on our end, if we were to get people that were wink, wink, I have depression, let me get signed up for this thing and let me charge my insurance for it. We don't want that either. So we both have to work to get people to their right destination. And that takes integrity, it takes coordination. I think it takes not a kind of either or territorial thing, and just realizing that there's different people come at this for very different reasons and with very different sets of risks. When I've talked in a number of settings, people will come in and say that a family member with psychosis somehow got their hands on something, underground and had a really bad experience. And that's somebody we would hope, would have gone the mental health path and been advised that perhaps for them, this is not going to be a good, a good fit. So I think we have a lot of work to do there, but I think it's doable. I think we have to educate. And I think that's with cannabis, it kind of got really messed up because a lot of things with cannabis got really medicalized, and there would be people that want the medical marijuana cards who really, it was wink, wink, right? I don't actually have this medical condition, but I want this thing. And that was happening in states that didn't have it for recreational purposes. I don't want that to happen. So I think if something's recreational, it should be classified as such. It should be legal. I don't want it to be illegal. So people have to go pretend to get it through medical, because I think that happened with cannabis, and that's very bad. That's what we have in New York. Now it's starting to change. But for a while, all we had was medical, and you definitely had people that were, there was not an actual medical reason, and it takes away from those who have the medical reason, just muddies the waters. And I think that's hopefully not happening as much with psychedelics, as we're seeing more of the legalization and decriminalization legislation happening. So optimistic that it's taking a little bit of a different path.
Yeah. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think that's, I'm very much for decriminalization and, regulation. And I think, if you look at the dangers of most of these drugs compared to alcohol, they are far safer than alcohol. And, I don't think that they should be for children, and I think they should be regulated in moderation, but I don't find a criminal approach is at all productive. It doesn't, it doesn't fit with how we think about any of this. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. I guess really kind of moving into this psychedelic space and kind of being an entrepreneur and trying to build a practice, what have been some of your challenges over the past few years moving into this space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a lot of people that are oh, I have an app and I have an app for mental health, and I have this simple thing that's going to solve this complex problem. And it's challenging to see those things get like money thrown at them. But then people that are like running the actual clinics and trying to work with insurance, like people will come to us and be like, oh, this, the margins on this aren't good when you take this insurance and all of that. And like, I think that the people sort of, I don't know, want it both ways. And things are either like super fancy private practice or like nonprofit, like, Medicaid losing money kind of stuff. And so I think it's hard to find the business models that are going to be like sustainable and equitable. And, I think that's why I'm very interested in like public benefit company structures that didn't exist. I don't think it existed when we first formed, but like, I'm really interested in that model, like Osmind, for example, who's building this whole digital platform for psychedelic medicine and interventional psychiatry. They're a public benefit company. Maya Health is a public benefit company, like companies that, they're not nonprofits, but they have sort of things built into them that they need to essentially do good by the community. And I think these are interesting ways to sort of balance. So you're not always like maximizing shareholder interests at the cost of everything else, because then you end up with, I think, practices that are pretty like low quality, high volume, sort of, like I said, sort of a McDonald's type experience. No defense against McDonald's, but that's just not what we need for our mental health care.
Yeah. I don't know too much about like the structure of public benefit corporations, but they're still for profit, right? But they're also trying to give back in a certain way. Like I know MAPS has their public benefit branch as well as their nonprofit branch. But yeah, I think it's like an interesting conversation too around money and psychedelics and mental health just in general. And yeah, I think that's a challenge too. It's like, well, we don't want to completely capitalize off of something that feels so sacred that has been used in indigenous cultures. We kind of get into that whole arena. But yeah, I mean, could we do something that's beneficial if we have money coming in, whether giving back to certain areas of the world, to certain peoples that have lineages, build new systems? Yeah, I don't know if you could expand a little bit more on that model there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's where like a public benefit company could make a lot of sense. I mean, I think for-profit ones nowadays are more socially conscious as well. And there's like, I think, a good, healthy peer pressure within the space to do good things and not be seen as the sort of, super capitalistic patenting everything kind of stuff, right? If people are trying to do that, they get a lot of negative attention, right? The whole patenting the paint on the walls situation, right? And that, I
soft color tones and hand holding.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to strike, right? Because if you're an investor, you want to protect your intellectual property, and at the same time, you don't want to create like undue barriers to expansion and accessibility. And so I think I'm seeing companies trying to grapple with that. I think pretty much all of them, I think, are trying to sort out how they fall along that continuum. So, and I think there's also a misconception that like just because something is nonprofit that it's like doing a lot of good. Like a lot of nonprofits, they do a lot of things and make a lot of money, and the CEOs make millions of dollars as well. So I think you really have to like look a little bit beyond the corporate structure and see kind of what kind of decisions is the company actually, is actually making.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just think about some of the work that I've done with some nonprofits and, just maybe some of the corners they cut. They're like really kind of scurrying for fundraising. And, it didn't always seem like a healthy environment in some containers. I mean, sure, some operate really great, but yeah, it's like,
Yeah, like it's not, I think it can be overly simplistic to just say that because it is, one sort of corporate structure that it's in it for the right reasons or whatever. I think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, totally. What are some things that you're feeling like really excited about in the psychedelic space?
No, big effect sizes. That's what we get excited about, right? I mean, I think when we're seeing it like the psilocybin trial that just came out, and the primary outcome measure, was basically equivalent, but then if you looked at all the other measures, this psilocybin beat the Lexapro, and just remarkable. And I think that we haven't seen those types of changes in psychiatry in quite some time. And like the New York Times has been, like, traditionally for the past several decades, they have been fairly standoffish towards psychiatry. They were much more into the sort of Woody Allen, like, lie down on the couch psychoanalytic thing. And they were very, very skeptical of all of the big pharma stuff and the Prozac Nation and all that. And now, the psychedelic stuff is on the front page of the New York Times as changing psychiatry. And so that to me is exciting, that we're starting to get shifts in public sentiment. Like even in the past 6 months, I'm seeing just such a, like, oh, hey, how about psychedelics? Like this is like a more mainstream thing. And on forums with colleagues, psychiatrists are starting to notice it. Whereas I think even a year or two ago, it was seen as like, oh, those MAPS people over there are doing that thing, or, sort of, that's sort of out there. Maybe something will come of it. And now people are starting to be like, oh, wow, this is a thing. I need to get on this train. Like, it's leaving the station. And to me, that's been very, very exciting. And patients are more open to it. We're seeing big stories in the media about people like Lamar Odom using ketamine and being transformed. And, all of those stories, I think, help to just make it seem like it's not, that it actually is a real thing, that it's not just, not there's anything wrong with using it recreationally, but that it really has potential for mental health in a way that it's just really different than what we've seen before. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and the difference, and I wonder, like, what's your take on how that will either change or maybe revolutionize psychiatry? And something I always come back to too is like this, like the concept of like spiritual emergence, and how does psychiatry deal with transpersonal phenomena? Like, do we shy away from it and say we don't understand it? I mean, how is psychiatry gonna, I guess, contain some of these like transpersonal experiences? Are they ready for it? I don't know.
I mean, I didn't learn about it in my residency. I'll tell you that much. I think we can't stay in our like little little ivory tower bubbles, or our little office bubbles. Like, I think, like, for me, I've gone onto Clubhouse quite a bit. I don't know how familiar you are with that. It's sort of social audio area, where there's like a very large psychedelic community and conversations happening. And, I can go from a conversation with like med tech people and, healthcare investors and insurance people, into a room about people talking about, their spiritual journeys and what dose to use and all kinds of underground stuff. And I think just having those conversations, bringing people together, has been really helpful, and seeing more psychiatrists kind of jump into those conversations as well. So we're not just like, I think people have an image of psychiatrists as a certain way, a certain sort of sterile, intellectual way. And then maybe a lot of us have like the sort of shaman idea that those are really, really far apart. But then when you start to have conversations, you realize that there's a lot of common ground, and a lot of people trying to sort of solve for the same things, and people having like really profound changes in their life for the better, and kind of coming together around that sentiment. And I actually think Clubhouse is really good for that, much more so than like, Twitter or Instagram or something, because you're actually talking with people.
Yeah, it's huge. I was on it for a little bit. I haven't been on it much, but I know that you have a pretty big following over there, and I think I've been in some clubhouses listening to you talk. I think that's how I was first introduced. Yeah.
I was on there early, and I got the handle at psychiatrist, so I got got to be kind of like one of the go-to people, I would say, for mental health, or like someone wants to ask a psychiatrist something, like I would be that person. And so that's been really cool. It's been met a lot of really interesting people.
Yeah, it's probably really fun. Really fun. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, we're coming up on an hour. Anything that you want to close with, or any like last topics that like maybe we didn't touch on that you really wanted to mention? Or any final thoughts?
No, I think, I mean, I guess my final thought would be that people can't ignore that system part of the equation. And we really do need to think about how payment models and clinic models are going to be ready. Like I think of it like, well, people are building the planes and we need to build the runways. And so I would encourage people to, get in touch to start to build those runways and airports so that we're ready, because the planes are coming.
Yeah, this is so important. It's something that Joe and I bring up pretty often. I think I just mentioned like that concept of spiritual emergence, and just thinking about like more and more people having these experiences. Like, do we have that runway, like that landing pad for people to come back to? Do we have those systems in place? What does a psychedelic ecosystem look like? What kind of collaborations can we have? Can we think of new models? Again, thinking about like maybe like peer support centers and for people to land in new models to help work through some of this stuff. I think is so important. I think, people are focused on the plane and just getting up there. And it's like, whoa. Well, once we've taken off, like what are we doing about landing? And where are the supports going to be for people when they do land? Because I get a lot of, these clients that have had really difficult experiences. They're trying to make sense of it, trying to reintegrate back into, society. And it's really challenging. And I think, mainstream psychedelic news is really just highlighting a lot of the highs of it and not always really kind of touching the lows. And I think when people get exposed to the highs and then they go, oh shit, there are these really big lows, but nobody's really talking about it. How do I approach this now? And, that can be really challenging for a lot of people. Really scary, really lonely.
Yeah. And I think we need to be prepared too, because it only takes a couple of those negative stories and stuff to get out there and shift public sentiment, right? And so we want to have the infrastructure in place to capture all of the experiences in like a responsible way, and not the sort of fly by night, like let me get rich on psychedelic kind of meme stock stuff that you're kind of starting to see some of.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dr. Carlene MacMillan, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Thank you.
Want to give any plugs, or if you have any events coming up or anything that you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. So actually, you can find me a lot of these times on Clubhouse. So I'm at psychiatrist on there. And we have a blog as well as our own small podcast compared to yours, but where we put audio excerpts and that's at thefrontierpsychiatrist.com. So people can go and subscribe to that. And then if you're interested in our clinical practice, just brooklynminds.com or, Brooklyn Minds across all social media is where you can find the clinical part of what I do.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much again. It's a really fun conversation. And just thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Happy to be here. It was fun.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Carlene MacMillan. Again, if you want to check out her work, you can check that out over at brooklynminds.com. That's brooklynminds.com. Really enjoyed the episode, learned a ton, and just appreciated this whole conversation around treatment, setting and systems, and insurance. And I know for those that have been following the ketamine Spravato topic for a bit, I know there's been kind of some controversy, but also seeing, I guess, some of the benefits there of increasing accessibility, even though it is kind of still expensive, but being able to cover it by insurance, I think, is important. So if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to email us at support@psychedelicstay.com. And again, be sure to subscribe to us, follow us on our social media channels. If you're feeling called to share this episode or share any of our episodes, that helps us out a bunch. So share away. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in, and couldn't do it without you. And we will catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today.